Great. Well, a very warm welcome to today's event, hosted by the International Culture Summit and the Edinburgh International Festival. This is part of the Artists in the Age of COVID series of conversations. And today our focus is community. My name is Jemma Neville. I'm a writer and a human rights activist based here in Edinburgh. And it's my absolute pleasure to host our event today. Thank you to all of you for joining the conversation from the many communities that you are a part of. And thank you to our esteemed panel of guests coming from all over the world. You're going to hear from them very shortly. First, a little bit of scene setting. With stages dark, orchestras silenced, and audiences in limbo, artists and organisations of all scales and across art forms are reimagining their futures. Questions of survival and resilience across the cultural sector are being addressed with an urgency unprecedented in any of our lifetimes. We're having a moment. So, how do peer-to-peer and artist-to-artist communities function in this brave new world? How are we connecting differently with our communities when we can't meet in person? And have some aspects of community engagement become more pressing in this moment in time, in which we're all thinking global, acting local? Indeed, that expression, to think global, act local, is often attributed to Edinburgh town planner and social activist Patrick Geddes in a public health context. I'm curious about all these things and more, and I know that you are too. So please do get involved by commenting and posting your questions in the chat space provided here. It's new technology and it's a bit of performance art in itself, but hopefully this feels inclusive and a space for rich conversation. Okay, so to our panel guests, and it really is an international mix of leaders from across the arts and from Highland Scotland to downtown Kingston, Jamaica. We could spend the next hour listing their many achievements, but I know that they will understand if I keep the introductions succinct for now. So, first up, we have Roderick Cox, a German-based American conductor. Roderick has been praised as a conductor who paves the way for others. He gained international attention for recent appearances with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Cleveland Orchestra, the Houston Grand Opera, and the Philharmonia Orchestra in London. With a passion for education, diversity, and inclusion in the arts, Roderick started the Roderick Cox Music Initiative in 2018. This is a project to help provide scholarship funds to young musicians of colour from underrepresented communities, allowing them to pay for instruments, music lessons, and summer camps. Welcome, Roderick.
It's good to be here.
Thank you for joining us from Germany, I understand, live from a sweltering Berlin.
Yes, it is very hot.
And to a different climate altogether, next up we have James Mackenzie-Blackman, who is Chief Executive of Eden Court, based in Inverness, here in Scotland. And Eden Court is Scotland's largest combined arts venue. James himself is an award-winning theatre producer, arts advocate and venue manager. He was previously Executive Director of Sir Matthew Bourne's dance company New Adventures and Executive Director of the National Theatre during the London Olympics. So James, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Great. And Andrea Dempster-Chung. Andrea is an engineer, an entrepreneur, and a business coach, among many things. She is the co-founder and managing director of Kingston Creative, an organisation seeking to transform downtown Kingston in Jamaica. Andrea is also the founder of Bookophilia, a bookstore that promotes Caribbean literature, and she's the founder of Go Global Art, an art marketing platform which helps artists from developing countries gain access to global markets. Andrea recently managed the arts portfolio for the British Council, where she developed strategy and key projects in film, literature, visual arts to drive the creative economy in Jamaica. Andrea, warm welcome to you.
Same to you guys. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. And then our fourth panelist today is André Gremillet. Hello, André. André is the president and chief executive of the Cleveland Orchestra in Ohio in America. Acknowledged as among the world's best, the orchestra team are working to develop the youngest audiences of any orchestra, to build on its tradition of community support within the city, and to diversify programming. André previously worked as managing director of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, and he was president and chief executive of the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra. Originally from Quebec, Canada, he is a conservatory trained pianist. Wowee! Gosh, aren't we lucky to have you all? Welcome to André as well.
Thank you.
So a virtual round of applause and welcome from my communities here in Edinburgh, Scotland, to where all of you are. And we're going to jump straight in to make the most of the time we have together, because community is a big, complex topic. To get it started, and to hear something of your own recent experiences of community renewal or reimagination in the last few months, I'm going to come to each of you to ask, what does community mean to you? Firstly, Andrea, now you're in the middle of a 10-year plan to transform downtown Kingston. Are those plans now on pause, or have you adapted them to meet current needs?
Oh, they're definitely not on pause. We're actually busier than we've ever been. For just a little bit of background and context, Kingston is the capital of Jamaica. We are UNESCO Creative City of Music, and reggae music was also designated as intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO in 2019. So it's a tiny little island of 2.9 million people, but one that has developed more than 6 different genres of music: reggae, dub, rocksteady, dancehall, mento, and ska. So the music, the language, the dances, the sound system culture, which has gone global, across the world, all the way to Japan, were all incubated in downtown Kingston, which is the old city, which is paradoxically also one of the most marginalized, stigmatized, and highest poverty areas in the country. So for us, our goal is to empower creative people and transform downtown. So for us, community is the culture. For some other arts organizations, the community might be the audience that you want to attract, or the residents that live in and around your venue, who, yes, you want to make efforts to include them and inform them. But our relation to the community is not really peripheral. This community of people are extremely creative, and they gave birth to the culture that has put Jamaica on the map. So, just one example is like Trenchtown, where Bob Marley and many other reggae greats lived and made their music. So that relationship with that community is integral to who we are and what we do. So what we're trying to develop is an art district downtown and a creative hub for development of creative people. And at the end of the day, long term, 10 years, as you said, a healthy creative ecosystem, so that the talented creatives that produces in droves. It's really unbelievable if you live here, just how much talent people have, that they can actually live and work in Jamaica full time as creatives and succeed, and at the same time help to grow and develop our creative economy in a sustainable way. So for us, the community of creatives, and especially those that live downtown, have to be at the heart of everything that we do. So when coronavirus hit, we had to respond in ways that supported that community. First off, we went virtual with our programming immediately. The art walk and the meetup that we do immediately went online. That did 2 things. It kept the community of the audience engaged and sane during a very stressful time. And very importantly, it kept the artists employed at a time when, their livelihoods were definitely being challenged. The second response was a project we called Masks for Downtown, where we hired 20 artisans from downtown to make over 2,000 masks for their own communities. And that created employment, and it ensured that the vulnerable in these very densely populated areas were supported with free masks. As I mentioned, poverty is extremely high, and when people are looking about food security, a mask is a luxury. Then our third response was something we called digital commissions, where we created a new pot of funds in partnership with our existing local sponsors to allow artists to go online and get paid to do so. We got like 126 applications and ended up benefiting 272 artists with this program over a 3-month period. So it was really needed. And then our fourth response was a free 3-week digital creative bootcamp that taught digital skills that creatives really needed to navigate this post-COVID world. Um, Digital marketing, setting up your online presence, tech tools for creatives, and e-commerce. Things we should have been doing, but COVID really just pushed the community further in that direction. We were happy to support. And then the last response that we had with our community is very recent. It just launched last week, and it's called Catapult, and it's a grant of 320,000 US that will benefit over 1,000 creatives across 34 countries. So now we're supporting from Kingston, supporting the Caribbean region, 34 different islands, with artist residencies, more training, vouchers so they can hire consultants, virtual salons. The goal is to generate that visibility, to nurture the artists, because we're in a very different situation. As a small island developing state, there is no arts council. There is no Creative Scotland. There's no national endowment for the arts. Our governments are dealing with bread and butter issues and just do not have the capacity to support, to give serious funding into the arts as other, governments may be able to. So this crisis kind of forced us to think global and act local, as you said, and leverage those regional partnerships, which we should have been doing in any case. So at the end of the day, COVID really refocused us more on community and accelerated some of the things that we should have been doing, in the first place. So we're looking at community safety, their ability to earn and survive, and the need really to arm them with these new digital skills that they need in a post-COVID world.
Thank you, Andrea. I love what you're saying there about community is the culture itself, and you had some fantastic images to illustrate that story. I'm hoping that they were seen for the audience. I couldn't see them. Could we get them up now, please, if they're available? If not, we'll come to them later. This is probably my fault because I've changed the order in which I was going to come to our guest speakers. So we had some great images from Kingston that if we can see now, it would be great to illustrate Andrea's points. No? Okay, we'll come back to that. I
Absolutely.
won't forget them
And
for
I'll just
sure.
explain them whenever you have them, it's fine.
Okay, thanks for your understanding, Andrea. Roderick, can I come to you next, please? Now I know
Yeah,
that
sure.
you're really passionate about inclusion in music education. So how have you connected with your communities during this time, and what do they mean for you?
Well, it's certainly been an interesting time as an artist or freelancer because I'm not associated with any sort of organization like the Cleveland Orchestra. So I suppose my responsibilities are fewer in terms of trying to figure out what to do about canceled concerts and restructuring an entire organization to meet the needs of what's happening now. For me, yes, there was the balancing of my schedule, of course, but at first there was just I was dealing with a bit of shock. What's next? What's going to happen? What do I do? Corona hit me quite quite interestingly because I was in midair heading to the United States for a concert when things were shutting down immediately. So I had to rush back to Europe right away. But I had to think very carefully. After I was getting over the shock, I was thinking about what type of artist do I want to be during this time and what our art form will look like after this is all over. And I think we've seen a lot of classical music artists and especially conductors and musicians connect through Zoom, learn how to use this. I think we've become much more technologically efficient and informed during this time of Corona. And so what there was a situation that happened, of course, that sort of got me out of my depression, or got me out of my sort of inner thoughts, and made me think about how I can connect with others. And that was over the George Floyd incident that happened in the United States. And many arts organizations and musicians from around the world took this as an opportunity to not only talk about racial and injustice in the criminal justice system and in education, but also talk about in classical music how what are some things we can do to sort out many of the systemic problems that have hampered our industry for many years in terms of programming or lack of access. And so I held several conversations with conductors and musicians from around the world, 8 of them, all African American conductors in different parts of their lives and in different generations, talking about our experiences and what we'd like to see in the future in terms of classical music and how it connects to communities of color, and how as organizations we make a sincere effort to bring about change in our community. So yeah, those are some of the things I've been doing during Corona.
You've been busy. And I wanted to return to the themes of leadership and perhaps even self-care later on, please. But before we do so, let's hear from James at Eden Court Theatre, where I know that the theatre itself became a community resilience hub. And I believe that you turned the foyer into a place to distribute community supplies, where normally you might have been selling tickets. And also you treated us to these COVID ceilidhs, something that you might need to explain to an international audience. So do tell us more about your communities, please, what it means to you.
Yeah, thanks. Just very quickly, Eden Court is Scotland's largest single-site art centre. We've got 2 theatres, 2 cinemas, dance studios and exhibition spaces in this incredible building that spans 3 centuries. The Highlands of Scotland is an extraordinarily beautiful place, but we're serving a landmass the size of Belgium. And we program theatre, dance, music and film, visual art, as well as hosting 50 community classes a week, delivering qualifications in dance and drama to children and young people from across the Highlands. And we are so much more than a traditional theatre that opens its doors at 6:30 every evening. We're busy from 9 o'clock every morning. So the COVID crisis has been an extraordinary time for us. Quite early on, just as we entered into lockdown, the financial imperatives that we were facing became very real. 88% of our income is generated from ticket sales, cafe, bar, and restaurant. And we were really facing financial crisis very quickly. And I was invited by our local authority to present the financial challenges that were facing Eden Court at one of their gold group decision-making meetings very early on. So most local authorities and councils around the UK have established these gold groups, which are the kind of top civil servants. And I was invited in to present what was due to be a very kind of black and white financial picture of the crisis that was facing Eden Court. And just before I got to give my presentation, the chief executive of the Highland Council was laying out to the gathered senior civil servants and elected members the real significant challenges that were facing the council, everything from establishing emergency phone lines, the need to set up humanitarian aid centres, the need to establish childcare hubs for key workers. And I was sat listening to all of these challenges that were facing the local authority and thinking, we could do that. I've got an amazing team of creative learning staff who could work in key worker childcare hubs and use the performing arts to enrich the curriculum for those young people. I've got a box office telephony system. I was sat thinking, surely, I knew it was web-based, surely that my staff, our team members could operate that for the council from home. And we would have this incredible big building that was going to be empty for a significant amount of time. So quite quickly, sat listening to all these challenges that were facing the council, I decided to throw the numbers out the window somewhat and just talk from my heart. And so I said, yes, Eden Court is financially facing somewhat of a financial Armageddon, but I think we can help with all of these challenges that you're facing in the humanitarian response to the pandemic. And so, yeah, within a week, our box office system had been turned into the free phone helpline for people across the Highlands. It was being staffed by our box office team from their homes. Our main house auditorium, we've got some images, I'll call those up in a minute, has been transformed into the food distribution hub for people who were shielding and other families who were experiencing hardship as a result of the pandemic. And members of our creative learning team were in the key worker childcare hubs, so NHS health workers could be in hospitals, and our team were working in that way. So I guess, to the question about, who is our community, what are our community? Well, here for us at Eden Court, our community is our colleagues, our artists and our participants, its audiences, and it's the sector. And I've just been super mindful throughout the pandemic to think about the relationship that we continue to have with those different groups. Quite early on, and maybe we'll come back to this later, but quite early on, I text a industry colleague that I really who I really respect on the other side of the world in Australia, and he was doing a very similar job running a large, complex building-based arts organization, and said, "What are you doing? How's it going?" And this colleague just texted back and said, "Block out all the noise and cling on to your values." And I'll be honest, that was just the best advice I've had so far, I think, and that was so useful for me. And Eden Court's values are proud, ambitious, open, and nurturing, and everything that we've done, I think, over the course of the last 5 months can be tied back to one of those values. I think a lot about leadership being very much about being driven by decisions that are both head, heart, or gut led. And never before in my career have I felt such tension between head, heart, and gut as I have through this pandemic. But I think starting to look back on the journey that we've been on so far, I'm really proud of the way that we have reimagined the building.
Yeah, you've shared a lot and definitely spoken from the heart there, which is exactly what we want in this conversation. I love the synergy that the Black Lives movement the Black Lives Matter movement has come. We go talking about it with Roderick in the skies for America and coming into Inverness. Everything connects, of course it does. Just now on the introductions and what community means, we'll go to André from Cleveland Orchestra. And the Cleveland Orchestra performed directly for caregivers during the COVID crisis. So, André, please tell us more about that, how civic pride has been nurtured as well in Cleveland as a result of that.
So
Now,
yeah, it's
I
been,
can't.
like,
Perfect. Hearing you now. That's great.
okay, is that good?
Perfect. Thank you.
So so the Cleveland Orchestra, of course, like so many institutions, has been facing this huge financial crisis, taken away from the stage overnight, basically. And really, I would use an adjective that some of my team members have indicated at times, and how schizophrenic it feels throughout this whole crisis. And in so many ways, from having to make plans that you have to undo the following week, and this constant uncertainty, of course. But I would say that it's also been really this real um, balance, if you will, or dual view of dealing with the crisis, making sure that we survive. And it's truly been, how do we make sure that we preserve what is a jewel in the world's cultural sphere, while at the same time taking advantage, if one can say this, of the situation to truly reflect about our role. And certainly as the leader of the institution, I felt very strongly that it's been my responsibility to not just to make sure that we survive and emerge intact from this crisis, but that we use that crisis to evolve even more quickly as an institution. And of course, that has everything to do with the community. So the Cleveland Orchestra was founded over a century ago in what was a very different city than we have now. Cleveland, at the time, was one of the richest cities in the world. I think it was number 5 in terms of population in the entire country. We're talking 1918 here in the 1920s. And it is now number 45 or 46 in terms of population. So it has changed tremendously. And the community for whom this orchestra was founded is very, very different, was very different than it is today. And we've been talking a lot about this in recent years at the Cleveland Orchestra. Since my arrival over 4 years ago, we've put together the usual strategic plan, but that really has focused on how to make more of an impact and how to reflect the community that we serve and for whom we exist in the first place. So I would say that this crisis for us has really accelerated, very similar to some of what Andrea mentioned earlier, really has accelerated a lot of the work and the thinking that was in place. And if anything, has stressed the urgency of moving forward and of increasing the pace. And of course, in the United States, and indeed in the world, but certainly in the United States, you cannot talk about what's happened over the past few months with COVID without talking about the George Floyd killing that Roderick referred to. And I would say that this has been, even more than the crisis, a real moment of reckoning for us, really bringing forward some tough questions. And we take great pride in the integrity of our institution, the artistic integrity, the integrity of what we do in the community. And I think that kind of looking at the mirror in terms of what are we doing to help with racial justice in a city that has a really large population of African American residents, with whom, to be honest, we don't connect nearly deeply enough. How can we do better? And that's been, again, a real moment of reckoning. And if there's any silver lining to this tragedy, is, for so many institutions and for us in particular, I think we are looking at doing much more and really asking ourselves the hard questions in a way that I think will have more of an impact for the community. But it's a work in progress. And one of the many things that keeps me up at night is making sure that we don't lose the momentum that has come from this, so that we truly can make more of a difference for our community. And of course, for us, and we'll talk about this probably later in this panel discussion, when we talk about community, of course, first and foremost, it's the local community. But by virtue of being one of the great orchestras in the world, we also feel that we have major responsibility in terms of our field. How do we increase diversity on the stage? How do we make sure that young musicians of color truly have the opportunity to shine the way white musicians have? And again, how do we truly look at the mirror and look at the industry and assess how we are doing and how we can do better? So to go back for a moment to what we've been doing during that time, Our musicians, of course, had to stop playing. Again, basically overnight, we played our last two concerts without an audience because we wanted to make a live recording that had been long planned, and then we sent everybody home. And we did what so many other orchestras have done, having our musicians create videos from home, lots of educational content, again, from our musicians. But perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of this so far for me as the leader has been to once again be reminded of the importance of tapping into the creativity, the individual creativity of our musicians, right? I run a big orchestra, an institution of a significant size. And of course, a lot of it has to be institutionalized in terms of initiatives. And I think sometimes there's a danger to lose the individual creativity of our wonderful musicians. And we've seen, again, what they can do during this crisis. Not only did they respond to our request to provide content, but of their own initiative, they started some incredible actions and initiatives that have had a tremendous impact. And one of these initiatives that Jemma was referring to in her introduction has been what they have called the healthcare heroes. So Cleveland, for those of you who don't know, is a major medical hub in the United States. It has 3 major medical centers, including 2 that are ranked at the very best, as some of the very best in the country. And of course, this entire healthcare industry around these medical centers. And our musicians of their own contacted these 3 medical centers and offered to play concerts for free, of course, to really acknowledge the work of these healthcare workers who are, truly heroes, facing the pandemic, risking their lives day after day to help the rest of us. And so they put this in place by themselves, recruited the musicians within the orchestra. Well over half of the orchestra musicians participated, and they put together 20 performances in these medical centers. And it was enormously appreciated. And in addition to having me marvel again at the sense of initiative and creativity of our musicians, it also reminded me and all of us of how much what we do matters. And to me, this is another kind of takeaway, if you will, of this crisis. I'm a big believer that we have to be humble as an institution. Yes, music is very important, but putting food on people's table is very important, and so many things need to be addressed in the community. But this initiatives and others reminded us that for the community, having music, great music, brought to people means a lot. It's very meaningful. And I think to be reminded of that and to realize again how we are responsible for something extremely important for the community is, I think, very uplifting as we go through this crisis. So if the video is cue, I would show this brief 1-minute video that was put together by Cleveland Clinic, one of the 3 medical centers, to just illustrate what I just talked about this Healthcare Heroes initiative.
They're world renowned, so I felt honored that I could sit here and listen to them.
We hope that the caregivers get today just a little bit of comfort from the beauty of the music.
To me, it's like just the greatest present. They made a difference in my life, and now I'm going to take this and bring it to my patients.
Thanks, André. Thank you. That really brought things to life. If community is culture. As Andrea reminded us, perhaps music, the arts is the language of that culture. And in fact, can we now return to Andrea's images, please? She's got some really striking images from Kingston. If we can show them now, that would be great.
So these, thank you very much, Jemma. So these are just some of the artists who are leading the transformation downtown in terms of the murals that they're creating in the old city. And this is an illustration of the 1000 Masks project, which we started with 2 NGO partners, ended up with 4, created 2,100 masks. And again, they're being distributed in those inner city communities of downtown Kingston and employing these mask makers from the same communities. This is the 3-week free digital creative bootcamp, because we found that a lot of our artists weren't particularly tech savvy, and that worked when you could meet people in person or interact at an art fair. But you know, with coronavirus, everybody absolutely needed these skills. So these are some of the courses that we offered, and which we'll be trying to ramp up and accelerate across the Caribbean with Catapult. And this is the flyer for Catapult, which, as I said, just launched last week. And again, it's just a way to get this this funding to different artists, creatives, creative entrepreneurs across the Caribbean in these 34 countries. So there's residency programs, there's salons which are discursive, there's again training, and then there's this go online and do whatever you want to do online, a performance, a dance, whatever it is, and we pay you to stay visible this time. So thanks very much for that, Jemma.
Great, I'm really glad we saw those. Thank you, Andrea. There's actually a question come in here from Elisa, and she's asking, Andrea, how you managed to leverage regional partnerships in your response.
Twitter. So social media is extremely powerful. I mean, I think with COVID, everybody is online, right? So we were just approached. We were doing our thing with our local partners, you know, doing what we could do with the funding we had. And then Open Society Foundations approached us on Twitter, just a DM. And then we reached out to a partner, Fresh Milk in Barbados, and we put together this program that now will have, you know, it's 10x the impact that we were having locally. So just that was it. It was just us talking about what we're doing as we're going.
Great.
But I think to remember about, yeah, just one thing about Jamaica is that we have just as many people living outside the country as live within the country. So, you know, in Toronto, in London, in New York, in Miami, Birmingham, it is a huge diaspora of Jamaicans around the world. And we've been always thinking about how do we engage this community that feels very Jamaican, feels very Caribbean, but they're disconnected, you know, from us by distance. And this has been a really good way to do so, you know. So one of our partners is a diaspora organization based in Miami that's helping with the program also. So it has been good because it's accelerated what we should have been doing in terms of seeing the diaspora community as our community also.
Interesting. Thank you. I want to come now to community engagement, which as a job role is often delivered by relatively junior team members, and speaking from my own personal experience, often by women. So do you think that the current urgency and need for strategic leadership regards community engagement, is that going to be sustained going forward? And that's a question really for any of the panel that want to come in. James, you spoke about peer-to-peer networks and leadership, as you did too, Roderick. So anyone want to comment about that, about how we'll perhaps hold in better regard community engagement as a role within arts organisations?
I can maybe kick us off on that. I started my career working in an education department in a building-based theatre, and the reason that I did that was that my own life was transformed by youth theatre when I was a teenager, and I'm now a chief executive of a building-based arts organisation who kind of very, very deep in my values is the importance of community and the power of the performing arts to change people's lives. And the reason I wanted to run this organization was because Eden Court, in its 46-year history, has had its responsibility both to art and to community side by side each other. And in the 80s and the early 90s, really pioneered the way for community engagement with the performing arts. And I wonder, and I think, maybe our ability to turn to turn our organization on its head and respond to the pandemic is absolutely informed by the fact that as an organization teenagers, one of the reasons I love this place is that teenagers swan around like they own it, and that that there are members of the general public who come in here every single day for their coffee, that we're a place where they connect and have relationships with our staff, and so I really hope as we emerge from this crisis, what can we all learn as an industry? Well, I just hope that sense of performing arts, building-based organizations needing to be truly embedded in their communities. I hope that's retained and maintained, and that that power is more evenly distributed. I in the running of this organization, for every hour spent talking about artists, I want to spend an hour talking about audiences. And maybe that's not gone on enough, and I hope that as we move forward into this brave new world that we still don't really understand much about, that ability to think about and rebalance conversation and investment in audiences and community is absolutely equal and alongside the conversation and the investment in artists.
Great. Yeah, I hope so too, that we have much more of a parity of relationship. I remember when I started my career, we used to call the roles outreach, which isn't a term we hear so much about now, because we understand that the culture is thriving outside of the big buildings as well, and it always was, of course. Roderick, do you think that we're seeing the emergence of a cultural commons regards these peer-to-peer networks? In some ways, the digital space is a sort of flattening of power structures, isn't it? Because everybody can get involved. Is that going to be sustained? What's your take on that?
Well, I hope so. It's causing, yes, many of us to become much more flexible. And I think even each week as I go about doing this, I'm trying to figure out ways to get out of my comfort zone and be more flexible. And I think in a way we also learn about community through doing these sorts of things. As an artist, through Instagram or Twitter or some of these social media things, um, now that I find myself posting things about some of the conversations I'm having, or my music initiative to give instrument aid to young people of color in the Twin Cities, and letting people know about some of the work that I'm doing during Corona as an artist. I'm surprised at some of the reaction, and it's fascinating that we're learning that people want this from us, especially as classical music artists, to sort of us to open the curtain and for us to see behind the organization of what's going on, and for people to also get to know us as musicians, as artists, to know our faces, and to come into their homes, like Andre said, the musicians going into the hospital or going into the community. I think it helps create like I said, a sincere relationship with those people in communities of color or underrepresented communities that you might not necessarily all oftentimes see in the concert halls, because it's not enough to just invite people to you. it means all the more to go visit them and meet them where they are and to find common ground. And I think that's the most important thing about community engagement is this listening and understanding and this shared responsibility to make a better world. And so I certainly hope this continues. But we also start with the idea that every organization is engaging the community, and I think here in this panel we have some excellent examples of what organizations should be doing. Um, However, what frightens me is some organizations going into hibernation or just saying we're closing doors, we're going to see you in August of next year or something like that. And what that does is shows the community that you're not really an invaluable
Mm,
part of the community, because after a couple months, if if I'm in a community and an orchestra has gone into hibernation, in 6 months I'll notice that, oh, I can live without this orchestra. What's the purpose? Why do they say they're so invaluable if I've been doing just fine without them? And so it's all the more important to emphasize the importance of art and music and culture into the fabric of the community, so the community can know that without it, um, without those entities in the community, it is not as great. That our lives are not as rich. So I applaud these organization of change and engagement during this crisis and trying. I think the most important thing is to try something, and none of us have. So we're to make mistakes, but I love to see organizations trying to do something to connect during this time.
Thank you, Roderick. Thank you. And I love the self-reflection you gave us earlier, asking what type of artist I want to be. And it's people that make organizations, isn't it? So that's a reflective question too of organizations. Who do they want to be in the world and for the multitude of communities they serve? I want to turn now to that sort of civic duty aspect and relationship with people in place. Um, Andrea, you mentioned that there is no arts council where you are, and and so you have to be resilient in a different way, and you're taking a long term view about transformation of place, and then that perhaps has interesting parallels and differences to André there in Ohio, where you've got a really strong link with Ohio as a place and shaping the orchestra's identity. So question to both of you and anyone else who wants to come in. Do you think that there is a civic duty, whether that's moral, economic, or social, for publicly funded arts organisations to repurpose themselves in a public health emergency? Not just the right thing to do, but the pragmatic and necessary thing to do.
I think that
If
there
I
is a duty.
go ahead,
I
please.
think that
Andrea.
there is. Thank you. Yeah, I think that there is a duty to support the community that you exist in. We are publicly, privately, and NGO funded, so we have three types of funding. But I don't think it's the funding that really dictates it. I think it's you know, your commitment to your community. So during the pandemic, we really had to look at our mission. I don't believe in an organization because of an outside influence deciding to be all things to all people. I think that's dangerous. But I think you do need to look at your mission, look at your values, and say, what can we do to support during a crisis while staying grounded in our mission? And so for us, for example, ours is empowering creatives, right? That's the first sentence in our mission. And so the 1,000 masks, we weren't making masks randomly. It was, how do we empower the creative people within the community to earn as well as provide this other benefit? So I think there's a balance. You have to stay true to, your ethos, but you also do have an obligation, you know. And what Roderick said about, if you just shut your doors and say, okay, see you in 2021, you really do speak volumes to your relevance, and then your audience re-engagement is going to be 20 times more difficult. André?
Yes, I could not agree more, Andrea, about the funding not determining. I mean, we are, as you know, in the United States, we have different models. In our case, by far the greatest part of our funding is private. But I think it's the exact same result. We have a civic duty because of who we are, because of what our mission is, to make a difference and to be finely attuned to what's happening in the community. While being true to ourselves. I'm always a bit suspicious of institutions who seem to redefine themselves at every crisis, and it just seems very opportunistic to me, and I think people see through that, and communities see through that. But if you're true to yourself and you honestly question yourself about the impact that you can have, I think that's the way to go. And again, you'll make mistakes, and sometimes you'll be overstretched, or sometimes you won't act as promptly as you should. But I think if you're having this honest conversation internally and with your community, and this is where the listening part that Roderick was talking about is so crucial. I think that the reason why we banned the word outreach from our vocabularies, it's because it cannot be a one-way street. You have to listen to what community is telling you, whether you like it or not, and react to what the needs are and what the value is they think you can bring. And I could not agree more with Roderick regarding the hibernation issue. And again, it's very difficult. All those of us running institution of a certain size, it's very easy for the institution to go down financially quickly. And some institutions simply, I believe, do not have a choice and need to hibernate. Luckily, we think in our case that we're in a different situation. And for all the reasons that Roderick mentioned and others, we believe it's imperative that we stay out there and do whatever we can to bring value to the community during this crisis. Our community needs it more than ever. If you start with the premise that music is really important for people, not playing during a crisis like this is a terrible thing, and we're doing everything we can to avoid that.
Thanks, André. And you're certainly bringing Ohio to the world just now. It's great to connect with you. We've had a question come in that speaks to self-care and how, as leaders, we make time to look after ourselves so that our leadership to our teams and to our communities can be sustained. I'm interested to know, how do we be sure that we don't overextend ourselves? So knowing when to step back as well as when to go in to make change. Particularly when, as individuals, perhaps as freelance practitioners, you might have real financial vulnerability yourselves. So that's a question to all of you, really. If anyone would like to pick that up about self-care.
I'm happy to
Don't all rush
start.
Yeah.
We don't believe in self-care here. No, seriously. I think this is, I am no expert, but I think we're all reading about this. I think the impact of this crisis in terms of mental illness and just how difficult it's been for people has yet to really fully appear. And I think it's going to be a very, very difficult situation. I see it with my staff. I see it with our musicians. It's very difficult for everybody. And I think there's a great danger to underestimate that as we deal with all the other issues we have to deal with. And I think it starts with ourselves as leader. I think if we don't take care of ourselves, we certainly don't lead by example, and we're not at our best to lead the institution. So, of course, that balance is extremely difficult. But I think more than ever, it's important to take care of everyone and to be especially attuned to to people who may be having difficulties during that time. Everyone is talking about, we're in this together, and it's become a bit of a cliche, but it is so true that none of us can do this alone, and we need to support each other in a very, very meaningful way.
And I think that that support of each other will have the capacity to transform organizations as we start to think about these issues. I very much feel personally that I've been in survival mode, but in terms of corporately, just trying to ensure the survival of my organization, and I can maybe now start to think about recovery and that duet, that sense of survival versus recovery, I think is really important in the context of self-care. I've got an organization that normally has 160 people in it. At the moment, there are between 12 and 13 of us running the organization, and 134 colleagues, I think, at the moment on furlough leave. Some of those colleagues all of those colleagues haven't stepped foot in this building since the day we shut our doors. And I think about them an awful lot, and the impact of this crisis is having on them and their families and their mental health. And then, of course, there's all the people outside of our body of staff, all of the artists who provide opportunities and creative experiences for audiences and participants inside our building normally, and they've not had the ability to be furloughed and to continue to get 80% of their pay. And so the point I want to make is that as we start to think about recovery of our industry, I'm starting to think a lot about how what our responsibilities are. It's back to that point about public investment and public money. I care incredibly about the public money that we're in receipt of, and let's face it, public money will never have been as sparse as it is going to be in the years to come. And I'm not going to be able to remember them all, but there's 7 principles of public life, aren't there? I think let me try and remember them: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, I think leadership. But so those 7 principles of public life here in the United Kingdom, I think you can put the self-care issue around those two. And I think if we continue as an industry, as a sector, certainly in Scotland and in the wider United Kingdom and European context, are going to take receipt of public funds, we're going to, I think, have to be accountable to those things more so than ever before, and especially in the context of self-care and supporting all of the different parts of our community through the recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the teenagers that are you say swanning around the building like they own the place. Well, they actually do, don't they?
Totally.
They do.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant.
Yeah, they do.
They see that and recognise it. Good. Other colleagues want to come in on the point about self-care and leadership. Andrea? Yeah.
I did, yes, because for us, it's like there's layers to this. So there's COVID. And of course, there's the impact on the organization itself. So how are we going to survive? Where are we going to find funding? Then there is the impact on our creatives, which is devastating in this economy. It's usually tight for creatives, but then it's really catastrophic now. And then there's the Black Lives Matter. And, Jamaica got independence in 1962, but, we're still wrestling with a lot of these issues of classism and colorism and, what shade of black you are. And then it just filters into our justice system and all of that. So there's so many inequalities that it's not the American version of Black Lives Matter that we're wrestling with, but it reopened all of these old colonial wounds that really had never healed. And so there's layers and layers and layers, and it's been just a very, very emotionally bruising period, if I could be very honest, and so yeah, we've been working through it, and maybe working through it is a coping mechanism in itself. But I think that we do need, I'm really glad you raised the point, and it's something I'm going to take back from this conversation to the team and say, maybe we need to look more deeply at what we do in terms of a conscious attempt at self-care as we come out of this. We have been like caring for others and making sure the artists are okay and making sure the organization's okay, but it really is a lot to process, and it has been layers and layers of impact, even here, and we're not even in the US. So.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, it's been a traumatic time, hasn't it? And I think there's a sort of collective and cumulative exhaustion that lots of us are feeling. Finally, Roderick, did you want to come in at all on that issue about self-care? Have we perhaps touched
Sure,
on things that you want? Great.
sure. I think it's yes, it's been wonderful to hear the three of them speak, and I'm not jealous at the fact that they have to run complex organizations, and so as an artist and a musician, self-care is something that is certainly important, and something I have to give a great amount of thought to, because I have to just be aware that I'm going to have a range of feelings and emotions, and that's okay. And how do I deal with that? I have to remain flexible and remain positive. I also I also have to reflect, but also plan for the future. One thing that's so beautiful about art and our art form is that in times of trouble, in times of darkness, in times of crisis, art has emerged even greater, even more powerful, even with something to say. And so, if I look in history, that gives me that keeps me positive. To some of the great art has come out of the ashes of something awful like this. And I think as organizations, as artists, we should be excited about that future, and how we can, and the role we can play a part of that. And for me, when I'm talking to an artist now, and they're talking about a program, and they're saying, oh, I want to do Beethoven this or Mozart that or Haydn that, I love those great composers, but it just sounds boring to me now, because it's like, are we going to, after all of this, are we going to go back to doing what we used to do? How do we take the George Floyd incident and what's happening with Corona and create new art, create art of unity, create art that brings voices together from all parts of the world? We as a world has experienced something together, and so the lines, the borders have been blurred. Now, how do we bring many of those different voices into our art form, into our concert hall, and say that we are together and we're going to move into the future together? So that keeps me positive, and I think that's a lot of the self-care that I use to help me move forward.
Great. We could all learn from that. Thank you. It's certainly not business as usual going forward. And actually, Roderick, you're segueing there into the final question I wanted to pose, because I'm conscious of time. We're going to have to wrap up shortly. And I just wanted to hear from all the panelists, which Roderick has started us off on, about your hopes for the future. What are your aspirations and dreams? Where will we be this time next year or beyond? And as part of that, can we address some of the inequalities that this COVID crisis has perhaps exacerbated or highlighted? A question came in about the digital divide regards older people in particular, and other people will be affected by the digital divide. So, in brief, have you any concluding remarks about the future and how we can make the world a better place? Easy. I'll come to you, James, first, if I may, because that's sort of the order we've been going in.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I guess, well, one of the things that I've reflected a bit on more recently is that in a UK context and in a Scotland context, before we had news of government emergency support for the industry, there was so much focus on the economic impact that we have to the countries that we live in, and of course the economic impact, what we pay back in value-added tax, and the kind of the economic impact we play in communities is critically important. But I didn't hear enough about the value that arts and culture plays in communities, and so and how important that is alongside the economic impact. So my hope for the future is that we as an industry and as a sector are much more able and proud to articulate the value that arts and culture has in people's lives. I hope that audiences come back. I think there's in this conversation today that there's been discussion about that being a great unknown. The longer that we're away in those traditional contexts, I think the harder it will be for us to get our audiences back inside our buildings, and I think that's really important. And of course that the wealth in the sector is more evenly distributed, both in terms of kind of the wealth, the financial wealth that we generate ourselves, but also how public funding is distributed.
Yeah, let's hope so. Thank you. Andrea?
Well, for us, I mean, the community work, I'm hoping that in the future, we actually devote more time to it. It's something that we always wrestled with, because for us, the creators of the culture and the creators of the art are very different from the consumers of the culture and the consumers of the art. If you look at your typical arts audience, it looks very different in Jamaica from the people who actually create that same music that everybody loves. And so we wanted to kind of bridge that, and ensure that the communities are really involved in every single thing that we're doing as an arts organization. But somehow that never, took enough preeminence in our planning. So I'm hoping that in the future, this has just demonstrated how critical it is, and that we will, be able to spend more time and maybe even invest more funds in that foundation laying work. It's not sexy, it's not flashy. You're going on the ground and you're going to meet the community where they are and visit people and talk to people, but it's really, really at the heart of who we are and at the heart of our future success, I believe. Bridging that gap between the creators of the culture and the consumers of the culture, and bringing us all together as one, and carefully articulating the what's in it for me for each of those stakeholders.
Good. Well, we wish you the very best with that and hope to keep in touch in the future. André, in Cleveland, hopes for the future?
I hope that a year from now, we keep getting out of our zone of comfort, that we don't, again, go back and be comfortable and go to the old ways, because this crisis has made, quite frankly, a new future, a better future possible. And if we look at our industry, I think in a year from now, we could be in a better place. We won't be where we need to be yet, but if we could be in a slightly better place, and if the momentum that we're seeing right now remains, this crisis, despite its terrible outcome, will have produced something positive, and I think that's my greatest hope.
Thank you. And Roderick, you really started us off on this theme, but any concluding remarks from yourself?
No, not really. I said it all, but thank you. I agree with Andre. I think we're stronger together, and in the future, I think one of the fortunate things we've had because of Corona is time to reflect and to think about our society and our fellow man. And I hope when our busy schedules come back, that we won't lose that we remain interested in having conversations and as arts organizations, being even having a more urgent attitude in terms of our engagement and listening to different voices of the community. So that is my hope, and I look forward to it.
Good, mine too. And thank you for your time. So the conversation has gone at pace, as I knew it would. But thank you so much for sharing your stories with heart and conviction from your many communities. So thank you, Roderick Cox, James Mackenzie-Blackman, Dempster-Chung, and thank you to our live audience joining from the communities that you're a part of. Thank you very much to the British Sign Language and captioning colleagues who've been working so hard in the background. That's Jill Wood, Catherine King, and Claire Harvey. Today's conversation was part of a series of events that are in the Edinburgh International Cultural Summit. So do check out other events on the themes of power, intersectionality, and the future in general for arts and culture. It's been a huge pleasure to host this conversation today. And we're going to play out with a clip, some Bach from the Cleveland Orchestra, because this is an arts event after all. So let's return to our core purpose. And I wish you very well. Stay connected. Thank you.